Hi guys, Gabi from UiPath Hacks here. Today's video is about the UiPath Data Service, how to activate it, what's the licensing model, what are the so-called entities, how to do the user management, and finally 2 quick examples of using it. Linked to Studio and linked to UiPath Apps. So the first step is enabling data service in UiPath. For doing that, you need to go to your admin section and then click the 3 dots here, go on edit services and just check the data service checkbox if it's not already selected and save. And that would, I think after refresh, just make the data service button available here on the left hand menu. That's all you need to do to activate data services. It's interesting to understand the licensing, and there is some help on that here on the UiPath docs page. Basically, UiPath Data Service is included in all robot or studio enabled licenses and includes 2 levels of service. One is free and one is premium. And the difference between the two is just made by the data storage volume and the maximum API calls per day that one is allowed to do. So basically, if you just want to try it out, it's free. If you want to use it intensively for your automations in your company, you might have to pay for it. And then there are some more details here which are not so interesting for our test right now, but you can go through them in case you want to use it heavily for your company. All right, so let's go to data service. Let's select it from the menu here. And first thing, we have to understand what are the entities. We have here a create new entity button. We can click it. We can give it a name. So let's create an entity for suppliers, for example. We call it supplier. We can enter a description if we want to. Save. And that makes it available in the entities page here. So we just created it. And we notice if we go on edit, if we click on it, we notice it has already 5 fields created by default, a unique ID, and some information, some metadata on who created it, when, or who updated it. So entities basically are data tables. So let's add some fields now to our entity. We would add one for the name. We would leave it as text. We can make it required or not. We won't do it as we have the ID, which is mandatory. And we can give it a maximum length, default value, and description. We'll just save it for now. We would add another field for the IBAN, so for the bank account, basically. We'll leave it text. We can give it a maximum length of, I think it's 16 normally, or 18, I'm not sure. And we can create another field for the country. And here we can play with something called choice sets. So we can give just a restricted list of values, like a list or an enumeration of values. We can do that, and we can create a new one. So we call it countries. And we give here some countries. So let's say Germany. Sorry, I deleted that. Another one. Romania, and we'll add here. We will add here India. Let's stop at 3 countries. So we have now the choice set. I think we have to create the field again. So we say country, and we'll select here choice set with the countries choice set. We can allow multiple values, but we won't. So the supplier can be for 1 country in our example. We save. So we have our 3 fields here created. So this is an entity. This is a table with these fields, and we can access and play with these from the studio later on. We will see how to do that. All right. So now that we have the structure of the table, we can add some data, and we can do it manually as an example here, we can say this record is from Germany. We give it here an IBAN. We have 8, 12, and we give it a name. Verdi. Save. Okay, so we have an IBAN which is longer than 18. I think I just entered one more. Right, that should do it. Right, so this is our record. And we can select it and delete it as well. We won't do it now, but we will add some more records in the example at the end of the video. And the next point I want to discuss is about user management, and that's very well built, I think. So we can go back to the documentation. We have here user management, and basically we can just view it and select it from the upper corner where we have seen the choice sets. And we have some user groups: automation developers, administrators, automation users, and everyone. And we have here some roles. And to understand these roles, it's easiest to go back to the documentation. Basically, the permissions are divided into two categories: administrative permissions and data access permissions. So for the admin permissions, we have different types of permissions. Manage permissions here is to create new roles and edit them and assign roles to user groups. So basically just the admin of the user role design. Then the view schema is just viewing rights on all entities and all choice sets. So basically allowing people to view what are the entities and the choice sets that we have defined here for one example. And customize schema is allowing those users with this permission to edit or create, and of course view and even delete entities or choice sets. So they can modify the structure. The view schema just allows the user to view the structure, and the customize schema allows the user to change the entity. So the fields, for example, in the table, they can add a new field and so on, and also interact with things like choice sets. Then we have the data access permission. This is referring just to the data inside the entities, not with the entities structure. So for the data permissions, we have no access, read access, where you can just view the data, or complete read and write access to all entities, where they can basically interact with the data here. So now we have the admin role. The admin role has the manage permissions on the administrative permission level. So admin role can just create users and assign roles. He can't change the schema, he can't even view it, he can't view the data. Then we have the data reader role, where he's allowed just to view the structure of the entities, for example, and choice sets, and also read the data. So they can just view, but they can't edit either the data or the structure. Then we have the data writer role, who can view the schema, can't modify it, but he can create, delete, update data. And then we have the designer role, and the designer can't change, of course, and all the other roles above can't change the user permissions and roles and so on. Only the admin can do it. But the designer role can interact with the schema structure, can change the schema structure, but can't interact with the data, actually can't even read the data. So again, this is kind of an admin, but only on the structure of an entities and not allowed to view or interact with data. So it's quite interesting how these were created. We can read some more through the documentation here, but this is the interesting part, that is very well segregated between users who can view the data, who can interact with the data, and users who can only view or change the structure of the entities and choice sets. Okay, so enough theory. Let's go to Studio and see how we can use data services with Studio. So the first thing we have to do is to make sure we have data services activated on our tenant. And we've seen that if that's done properly, we get this Manage Entities button, and we have access here to our entities. We see that we can't view, for example, the supplier one that we've just created. because it was created before Studio was opened, and we have to edit anyways. So back to entities, we have 3, we have supplier, and in Studio we can see only 2. So we can refresh, and that will allow us to select the supplier entity as well. And if we do that, we can save, and it's creating a namespace for this new entity. So we did that. We made sure we have the Manage Entities button. We have refreshed and got our new entity here. Now we can use it. And also we have to install a package that's called the UiPath Data Service Activities. So just search for that, install it, and then we can use the activities specific to data services. If we just search for entity here in activities, we can see the most important activities. We have the create entity record, delete, get entity by ID, query entity records, and then update. So we will look today at the query entity records and the update one together in one example. And then we will play with create entity record with a new test, a very simple test. So for the query and update ones, I have already built a use case, and if you watched my previous video on apps and design of the apps, you would have seen this workflow already, but I will just go through it quickly and this time focus on the data service part and not on the apps part. So basically this workflow is counting the number of files in some folders for an app, and then calculating some indicators for new files, for files in progress or in error or files completed, and then it's sending this data back to the app through the arguments, to the out arguments. But what's interesting for us is how to use and also why do we use data services here. We are sending these out arguments to the app, but we want also to make sure we store them in data service just to ensure that when the user using the app goes back to the same page, those values are refreshed on the page and pulled actually from data service rather than lose them and ask the user to enter them again each time he enters a page. So we do that with data services. We have here the designer UX entity, and we have the standard fields plus 4 fields for number of documents, which are numbers. So documents done, in error, progress, and new. And we have 4 text fields, 4 different paths in which the bot is counting the documents. So our bot is basically first pulling or querying the designer UX entity inside data service, and it's querying it by an ID. In this particular example, we have only one record. We will always have only one record in this entity because we only need one line to store how many documents are new and done and in error and so on. We don't need multiple records, and therefore our ID will be always fixed, will be this one. So I'm just querying by this ID, and that's done with the new system.GUID and then just putting the number here. And as an output, I'm getting a list of designer UX objects. Here it is. It's list of designer UX objects. And then I'm getting basically the first one as a designer UX object. So we see its type here, designer UX. And this namespace is created basically when we manage the entity here. So the moment I select this entity here, it is imported as a namespace here in my automation. So I'm getting this object, and then I'm updating the object's fields. So we have the UX object docs new, for example, and it's getting this value, and docs new is exactly the value I have here in its name. So this is the display name, and this is the name used by Studio, for example. So I'm updating all the fields that are relevant from this object, and then I'm updating the entity record back to data service. So I'm selecting again the entity type of designer UX. Then the input record is my object, which I've pulled before with querying, and I've updated its values. And then there's no output record. And that's it, basically. So the way to update something in some existing record in data service is not to just call it and update it directly, but is rather to pull it with a query. So pull the object, modify its values, and then send it back via update entity record. And just to demonstrate very quickly how it works on the app, We'll go to our designer UX app. We will preview it. And basically our app is displaying the number of documents in each category. Right now it's running the bot, which is updating the values from data service. So it remembered it has 3, 6, 7, and 6. It's pulling them from here. So this is already where we are using data service. And basically the example I just shown you was called when I go into settings. I put here some folder paths. For example, if I modify the one with new and done, if I use the same folder here, it will have the same number of files. When I click save, it runs my bot, which I just showed, and it's counting again the files from the folders and then updating the record on data service as well. So let's see that. It has finished running. You see now we have 3 and 3, so the same number on both. And if we look in data service and we refresh, we will see 3 2 times. So we have kind of duplicated the docs done with the same number of new docs. So this is the usage that I found for data services in apps when we have apps with different pages. Like this one, where we have the main page and we have a settings page. It's very useful to make the values on the pages persistent, especially things like settings or customizing values, where if we didn't do it, the user would go back to this page and see everything blank and would have to again enter the same values, which would be, of course, annoying for the user. So using data services with apps, one very good use case there is to just make sure you make the data persistent and avoid that the user has to enter the same things twice. All right. And going back to our agenda here, we also want to see how the create entity record works. So let's go back to Studio and let's make here a new workflow. So we say new record. And we will play with our supplier entity, which we've just created. So go back to entities. We have supplier here, where we have country, IBAN, and name. And let's create a new record and update it to data service. So to do that, we have to create a record first. Let's use an assign. We can use a multiple assign because we will have more fields to create. Let's create here record. So we say Control K. We say supplier underscore new, for example. For our variable, we would change its type from string to supplier. So we can just search for it here. And here it is. And we can say here new supplier. So this just makes a new instance of a supplier object. Okay, so let's add now the other fields. So supplier new dot name. And we will just call it supplier 1. Let's add the IBAN, supplier new dot IBAN. Let's add the dummy value here, D12. And then let's add the country. And here we have a choice set. So if we enter just the value, we will have an error. So something like cannot assign a string to system nullable one. It refers to this. So basically here for the choice set of country, we have to enter our enumeration or choice set and then dot, and we have here our values Germany, India, and Romania. So we can do that and that should work. So we've created our object, our supplier, and added a new name, IBAN, and country. And now what we have to do is create a new entity. So create entity record. Actually a new record, not a new entity. We will add a record to this existing entity. We will select our supplier entity here. And we will add as an input our object created here, so supplier new. And that's it. We have created it, we have assigned the values, and then we are updating it. So let's see if it works. We go here to our supplier entity, we have data, we have only one row, which we have created manually. And if we run this file, it has finished running. and we should be able to see the second row as soon as we refresh. So Germany, supplier 1, with our other values here, IBAN and country. One thing to mention is if you modify your entity while you're working here, you should just refresh here, and if anything changed, you can click on the button here. There will be, I think, a green button here with changes to refresh your existing entity, or if you have created a new entity, you will see it here. You just have to check it and save, and that will bring the namespace into your studio so you can start using it. So that was it for today. We have seen how to activate the data service, how the licensing model works, how to work with entities, how to do the user management, and finally we have seen 2 examples, one of an already developed app where we have used data service to make some values persistent in the app, and one where we are just creating new records, so data for an existing entity. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you want to support the channel and be informed of future videos, please subscribe and click the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and have a great day!